For the cheapest coins with fast delivery and quick customer support, check out my sponsor, Red Zone Coins, and use code SWIFT at checkout for 20% off.
So family, and today I'm coming back at you guys with another video on the channel, and in today's video, we're going to be ranking NFL wide receivers as we head into the 2020 season. Now, if you guys are enjoying this style of content and you do want to see more of it, be sure to leave a like down below. I did a quarterback tier list video a few days ago, and you guys really did enjoy that, so I'm probably going to post more content kind of just centered around the NFL a little bit, and maybe a little bit less Madden content as we get closer to Madden 21, because I know a lot of you guys that are subscribed to me are obviously huge fans of football and huge fans of the NFL, just like I am, but a lot of us are starting to play Madden 20 a little bit less, so expect more of these videos as we get closer to Madden 21. Now also, if you guys don't think I'm right on any of these rankings, leave it down below in the comment section on the quarterback tier list. I had a lot of you guys that were voicing your opinions in the comments, and I absolutely love to see that and hear what you guys have to say. I will say a couple of you guys took it a little bit too far, coming at my family in the comment section because I ranked your favorite quarterback too low, so let's try and refrain from going that far. I am just a 19-year-old Canadian kid who put your wide receiver a little bit lower than he maybe actually is, but do let me know in the comment section where I was wrong. Maybe just don't get aggressive like some of the people did in the last video. But without further ado, let's hop into these rankings and start this one off with Golden Tate. So yeah, right off the bat, we have Golden Tate right here, and this is a pretty simple ranking for me. He's going to be an average wide receiver. I don't think he's below average. I wouldn't say that he's like a bad receiver in the NFL, because he's definitely quite a playmaker with the ball in his hands, but I don't think I would call him a great receiver either. I think average is definitely a pretty fair placement for Golden Tate. Now next up we have Sammy Watkins, and this is actually a tough player to rank for a couple of reasons. I'm going to put him in the average category. I don't think he's a great wide receiver, but I think he's definitely at the top of the average category. The reason why I don't want to put him in great is just because he's on the Chiefs right now, and I feel like his production could be a little bit inflated because, of course, he's going up against worse corners and just simply getting straight up one-on-one matchups because of all of the weapons that the Chiefs have. So I'm going to put Sammy Watkins as an average wide receiver. On the Bills, he was definitely good. I don't know if he was great on the Bills. He's obviously still really young, and could definitely improve in the coming years. I could easily see him becoming a great wide receiver, but for now, it's tough to classify him as a great wide receiver when he's not even the best on his team, and they honestly just have a ton of other weapons there, which gives him a lot better matchups, and I think his production could be a little bit inflated because of that fact. So Sammy Watkins is probably going to be average for me. The next guy on this list is going to be John Ross, and I'm probably also going to put John Ross in average. He's only been in the league for a couple of years. I feel like he's had a really injury-riddled career so far, which is definitely unfortunate. And like Sammy Watkins, he obviously could progress into a great or a star wide receiver. I'm not going to put John Ross in the below average category. I don't honestly think there's going to be a lot of receivers on this list that will even make this category, so John Ross is probably going to be an average wide receiver for me. Now next up we have Tyreek Hill, and I think Tyreek is a top 5 receiver in the NFL, hands down. I'm going to put him in the borderline elite category because I do think we actually only have 3 true elite wide receivers in the NFL right now, but Tyreek Hill affects his offense in so many ways. Even when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, just the threat of him running deep just creates so much separation for other wide receivers running like mid-range or short routes. So Tyreek is absolutely dominant out there when he has the ball in his hands. Obviously he can score from anywhere on the field, but even when he doesn't, he affects the play in so many different ways. I'm going to say Tyreek is probably borderline elite for now. I think he could become an elite receiver in a couple of years, but I am just going to throw him in borderline. I would say he's still a top 5 receiver in the NFL, and the Chiefs absolutely stacked, man. They have so many weapons out there, which is just crazy. Now next up we have Deshaun Jackson right here, and I think Deshaun going into the 2020 season is probably going to be an average wide receiver for me. If you asked me this question maybe 4 years ago, I would probably put him in the great or star section, but heading into 2020, Deshaun is probably just going to be an average receiver for me. He is definitely getting a lot older. He kind of reminds me of Ted Ginn, to be honest with you, and I could see his career kind of going the same way as Ted Ginn's has as he continues to get a little bit older, but for Deshaun, I'm going to put him in the average section. Honestly, I think we're going to have a lot of receivers in this average category. I might have to go through at the end of the video and kind of pluck some of these receivers from average and move them up to great or to the star section, but for me, Deshaun is probably an average receiver. Now next up we have Keenan Allen, and Keenan Allen for me is probably going to be a borderline elite wide receiver. This could be a little bit too high of a rating, but this man just absolutely produces every single year. I saw on Twitter a couple of days ago he was saying he was the best wide receiver in the AFC West. I don't know that I agree with that, but I love the fiery and competitive spirit that he's got. I think I also saw a stat as well a few days ago that said he'd had over 1,100 yards in every single year that he'd been in the league or something like that. And the man just absolutely produces every single year, so I gotta put him in the borderline elite category just for that. Getting 1,000 yards or more from a receiver probably puts him in the borderline elite category for me. So Keenan Allen is definitely a dog, crazy good route runner, and he's gonna be borderline elite. Now next up we have Jarvis Landry, and again, similar to Sammy Watkins, this one is kind of hard for me to rank. I think Jarvis is pretty overrated, to be honest with you, but I am gonna throw him in the great category. I think he's better than an average receiver. Honestly, I could move Sammy Watkins up to great as well. We'll see how the list looks at the end, but Jarvis Landry for me is probably gonna be a great wide receiver. He's definitely a really special talent on the field, and for that reason, more for like his talent alone, we're gonna put him in the great section. Obviously, he hasn't produced crazy well since he's been on the Browns, but for talent alone, we'll put him in the great category. So I made an executive decision and I put Sammy Watkins in the great category, and I think that is where Courtland Sutton is gonna be as well. I believe he's going into his second or his third year in the coming season, and he actually had a really great year statistically on a team that didn't have a ton of weapons and was really shaky at the quarterback position until, of course, Drew Lock came in at the end of the season and definitely performed pretty well. But Courtland Sutton for me is going to be a great wide receiver. Super excited to see what he can do in the coming couple of years. I think he's really just scratching the surface. I can see him moving up to become a star wide receiver, but for now, he's going to be in the great category, and I think the Broncos definitely found something pretty special in Courtland Sutton. So AJ Green is the next wide receiver that we've got right here, and I think AJ Green is probably going to be a star wide receiver for me, but he's going to have to prove it again this year that he can play and perform at a high level. Of course, AJ was definitely dominant earlier in his career, maybe like 3 years ago, but for the last couple of seasons, obviously he was injured all of last year, and was kind of just in a tough situation, we'll say, with the Bengals. I think talent-wise, he's definitely in the star category, so that's why I'm going to put him in there. Obviously in a difficult spot the last couple of years, but hopefully Joe Burrow can perform and stabilize the quarterback position, and I think AJ Green can definitely go back to being a dominant receiver and a star wide receiver in the league. I think this is a fair placement for AJ. I don't think he's as good as some of these other borderline elite receivers, but I don't think he's also in the same tier as some of these great receivers. He's definitely better than these players, so I'd say AJ is probably a star wide receiver in the league. Julian Edelman is the next player that we've got to rank, and if we're talking playoffs, we're throwing him in the borderline elite or maybe even the elite category, but just heading into the 2020 season and kind of more focused on the regular season, I think he's probably going to be an average wide receiver. Obviously, super competitive guy, but I think he's got to be in the average, to be honest with you. I don't think you can really make a case that he's great. Obviously, in the playoffs, like I said, he becomes elite, but to be honest, I'm probably going to throw Julian in an average, and I think this is probably a fair placement for him. So JuJu SmithSchuster is the next player on this list. This is actually a tough ranking as well. I don't know whether to put him in star or great. I honestly don't think that he's in the same tier as AJ Green, so we're probably going to put him in great. I think that's a fair placement, to be honest with you, for JuJu SmithSchuster. Obviously still super young. It feels like he's been in the league for a lot longer than he has, just because I feel like he's actually played a lot of different roles in the Steelers. Obviously, he was there when they had a ton of weapons, and he was there this year when he was really their only weapon, so that's why it feels like JuJu's been in the league for a while. Obviously, he's still going to have to develop to be able to kind of take that #1 role, because he didn't have a great season statistically last year. I'm probably going to put him in the great category, and I do think that's a fair placement for JuJu. So Will Fuller is the next guy on this list. This is actually a tough ranking as well. I don't know whether to put him in great or to put him in average. As we look at these tiers though, I don't think you can tell me Will Fuller is kind of the same level of play as these great receivers, so we're going to put him in the average category. I do think that's a fair placement for Will Fuller. Obviously, he's had a ton of injury issues as well, which is going to factor into this decision, because if he can't play, it's hard for me to put you in a high tier, so Will Fuller is probably going to be an average wide receiver. Now, next up, we have A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown obviously had a great season last year. I think he's probably going to make it into the great section. I don't think that I can put him into the star category. I think that's a little bit too high after he's only had one season, but similar to my guy Courtland Sutton right here, he's probably going to be in the great category. I feel like we'll have a lot of great wide receivers on this list, to be honest with you guys, but A.J. Brown, probably a great wide receiver for me. Now, next up, we have Marquise Marquise Brown, and honestly, if you guys take a look at the stats, people think he had an incredible season last year, but compare him to AJ Brown and compare him to Courtland Sutton, and you'll see that statistically he was actually a lot worse. He kind of just had a lot of long ball touchdowns, and the fact that he's a deep threat gets him on like SportsCenter and stuff like that, on like the big play highlights. But for me, I'm going to put him in the average category. This is probably the toughest rating I've had to do. I think he could easily become great this year, but I'm just going to put him in average for now. This is a tough ranking. I feel like he's kind of similar to Will Fuller just based on how they played last year. Obviously, Marquise Brown can develop a lot more, but just based on how they played last year, I feel like he plays similar to Will Fuller, so I'll put him in average. This is a tough one for me. He's definitely at the top of average, and I think he could easily become great, but for now, I think we'll slot him in the average section. Now next up is John Brown, and John Brown is a super underrated player in the NFL. He actually went for 1,000 yards last year, and I'm putting him in the great category. I know he maybe should be average, but we're putting him in the great category. I believe in John Brown. He actually went for over 1,000 on a team that didn't really have a ton of other weapons, so shout out to John for having a great season. I'm going to put him in the great category. I think this is fair based on how he played last year, so John Brown is making the great category. Now next up, we have T.Y. Hilton, and T.Y. Hilton has had an absolutely injury-riddled career. I think that if he was able to stay healthy, he would probably be in the star category with someone else like AJ Green, but because he isn't able to stay on the field, I'm going to put him in the great category. I think we're going to have a lot of players in this great and average section, and a lot of these guys could take a leap and become stars next year, but I think T.Y. Hilton is probably going to be in the great section for me. Now next up, we have Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs is also a tough player to rate. I don't know whether to put him in great or to put him in star. This is a really, really tough one to rate. I'm going to put him in star. This could be a high rating for Diggs, and I think Diggs is actually a little bit overrated sometimes, but obviously a great wide receiver, great hands. He's just a good all-around receiver, to be honest with you guys. So I'm going to put him in the star category, and I think that's a fair rating. I think if he doesn't have a good year, I could put him in great for sure. Obviously, he's on the Bills now. To go along with John Brown, that's actually a couple of really solid wide receivers. The Bills have kind of got going over there, so shout out to the Bills for building a good team. I do actually like the Bills. Obviously, they're one of the closest teams to where I go to school, only an hour away. So obviously, Stefon Diggs is probably going to be star. Definitely a high rating, but I do think a fair one. Now next up, we have DeVante Parker, and this is also a really tough one to do. I don't know whether to put him in star or great. We'll probably put him at the top of great. I think that he's actually super underrated, and honestly could easily become a star this year. He dominated, especially at the end of the year last year, but we're going to put him in the great category. Like I said, we have a lot of great receivers that could easily slot up into the star category. Now next up, we have my guy, Can't Guard Mike. This is the easiest rating we will have today. He's a elite wide receiver. You can't tell me otherwise. The most valuable wide receiver in the league. Maybe he's not the best wide receiver in the league, although I think he is, and I am pretty biased. I will say that he is the most valuable wide receiver in the league. He is more valuable to this team than the Hall of Fame quarterback that we have, Drew Brees. So Michael Thomas is elite, and I don't think anyone can argue that. Now next up, we have Julio Jones, who also is elite. I do not think you can argue that. I will throw him in the elite category. Him and MT, in my opinion, are the top two wide receivers in the NFL. I think in a couple of years, Michael Thomas will be the undisputed number one. Obviously, Julio Jones is 31 or 32, and Mike is only like 26. So Mike just getting into his prime, Julio kind of getting to the end of his prime. So we'll see how that all shakes out, but definitely, I absolutely love Mike Thomas, and I do respect Julio Jones' game as well. I think they're both elite. I know Falcons and Saints fans, we don't like each other, but I think we can both agree that both of them are elite wide receivers. Now next up, we have Chris Godwin. I absolutely love Chris Godwin. I'm putting him in the star category. He had a great season statistically last year in honestly a really pass-happy offense, which definitely helped him out, but I do really like Chris Godwin and the way that he plays. I actually drafted him in fantasy football at like, I think round 6 or round 7. It was an absolute steal. I just had a feeling that he was going to be good, and he ended up being dominant. Number 2 wide receiver, I think fantasy football-wise last year, so I'm going to say he's a star. I hope he can keep up the production because I actually do really like Chris Godwin, and he honestly almost came out of nowhere. I do remember, I think like 2 years ago, the Saints were playing the Buccaneers in the last week of the regular season. We had already like clinched, I'm pretty sure, the NFC South, and the Buccaneers also kind of were in shambles, and Chris Godwin dominated that game, and I was like, damn, this guy could be good. And then who would have thunk it? He was absolutely dominant last year. So Chris Godwin, I would say, is a star wide receiver. Now next up is Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders obviously is now a Saint. I think he's in the great category. Obviously I don't think he's star, and I do think he's better than an average wide receiver, so we're gonna put him in the great section as well. Now next up we have Adam Thielen, and I kind of feel like I should probably rate Adam Thielen and Stefon Diggs together. I think Thielen is probably going to be a star. You know what? He maybe is a great wide receiver, but I am going to put Thielen in the star category. Like I said, I think there could be a lot of fluidity in between these two rankings right here, the star and the great section. These receivers could move up really easily. I could see DeVante Parker moving up really easily. Courtland Sutton, I could see having an incredible year. AJ Brown as well. Honestly, a lot of players in here. And I could also see some of these guys in the star section regressing. Maybe Joe Burrow doesn't pan out, and AJ Green is just kind of having a worse statistical year. He could move down to great. So again, lots of fluidity in these two, and I think that these two are honestly really similar when I rank these guys. Now next up we have Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones to me is probably going to be an average receiver. When we get to Kenny Golladay, he'll get a high rating. I'm really high on Kenny, but I'm actually not super high on Marvin Jones. I think he's going to be average. I don't think you can call Marvin Jones great, so we're probably going to put him in the average section. Now next up is Tyler Lockett. I'm going to put Tyler Lockett in the great section, verging on star. Like I said, Tyler Lockett, that catch he made against the Rams, that toe tap was insane. I thought Russell Wilson was throwing that ball out of bounds, and somehow Tyler Lockett made that catch. I do really like Tyler Lockett, to be honest with you guys. I love the way he's developed over the years. I remember watching him because I do watch the Seahawks quite a bit, and he was almost exclusively a kick return and punt returner, didn't do much as a wide receiver, and he's really developed that side of his game, which is super impressive. So Tyler Lockett is going to be in the great category to me. Now next up we have Deebo Samuel. Just like these other rookies last year that had a really good season, I think he's going to be in the great section. I can't rate him in the star section yet, but I think again, similar season and similar effect on his team as he had with AJ Brown. I would say Deebo Samuel actually affected his team more than Marquise Brown did, so that's why he's going to get in great and why Marquise is going to be in average. Now next up is DeAndre Hopkins, and like I said before, I think there are 3 elite receivers in the NFL right now, and these, I think, are the 3 elite receivers. I think that is definitely tough to argue, so DeAndre Hopkins is going to make the elite section for me. Now, next up, we have Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson is a tough one. I don't know whether to put him in great or to put him in average. I'm going to put Allen Robinson, we're going to put him in we'll put him in the great section. This is a tough one to rank, but Allen Robinson is going to make the great category for me. I'd say he's kind of at the bottom of the great category, to be honest. Although he is pretty underrated, I would say, in the league. I think he's just simply a great wide receiver. Now next up is Brandon Cooks, and as a Saints fan, I do not like B. Cooks at all. If you guys do remember, if you are Saints fans, we played against the Rams on my birthday 4 or 5 years ago, and we blew them out. Willie Snead threw a touchdown pass to Dante Hightower, and after the game, Brandon Cooks tweets out, "Closed mouths don't get fed," because he didn't get a catch when we won the game like 50-6. So for that reason, Brandon Cooks is in the below average category. Nah, I'm just trolling. Brandon Cooks is probably, let's just call him an average receiver. Honestly, he could be great, but because I don't like him, I will say I'm being a bit biased here, but I'm just going to throw him in the average category. I don't like Brandon Cooks at all. Maybe he could be great. I guess you could call him great. He's definitely not a star, but I guess you could call him great. He probably is in the great category, but because I don't like him, I'm throwing him in average. Now next up we have DK Metcalf, and just like all the other rookies that had good years, obviously he's going to be in the great category. He was actually really dominant at the end of the year. Super excited to see what he can do next year. I think he could easily become a star, and like I said, there's a lot of fluidity in between these two tiers like I mentioned before. Now next up is Davante Adams. Davante Adams, borderline elite for me for sure. I would say he's probably maybe the 5th best wide receiver in the NFL, to be honest with you guys. So Davante Adams for me is going to be in the borderline elite category. Super crafty at the wide receiver position. He's not crazy big. He's not crazy fast. He seems to just win with footwork and good route running. So Davante Adams, I do really like him, and he's going to be borderline elite. Now next up is Alshon Jeffery, and Eagles fans, you guys can get mad at me, but I think I'm just going to call him average. I don't think Alshon Jeffery is a great wide receiver, although he is really clutch in the playoffs, like super clutch in in the playoffs. Kind of similar to Julian Edelman to me. I think I'm just going to call Alshon an average wide receiver. He could be verging on the great category, but just looking at these players in great, I don't think he's as good as some of these other guys we had in the great section. Now, next up is Larry Fitzgerald. And Fitz, I gotta put him in the great section. Maybe he's average, but just because of the legacy around Larry Fitzgerald and the leadership qualities, I know a lot of these people aren't going to affect their rating based on their leadership qualities and off-field performance, but Larry, I can't not put him in great. The dude is an absolute legend, so that is where he is going to be for me. Now, next up is Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is actually a tough one to rate. I'm going to put him at the top of star. I don't think he's a borderline elite wide receiver. To my Cowboys fans, I already gave Dak Prescott a lot of love in my quarterback ranking, but I'm going to put Amari in the star section, and I do think that is pretty fair for him. Now, next up, we have DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, the two wide receivers on the Carolina Panthers. Now, for Curtis Samuel, I'm putting him in below average, and for DJ Moore, I'm putting him in great. I think that's a fair ranking. A lot of people do get these players confused, but DJ Moore, much, much better than Curtis Samuel. Actually, we're probably going to throw Curtis Samuel in average. I don't want to have him in below average. So DJ Moore, obviously, in my opinion, is a lot better of a receiver than Curtis Samuel. DJ Moore, I think, could actually be really good next year. So next up is Mike Evans right here, and Mike Evans, I feel like a lot of people would put him in the borderline elite section. I don't think he's good enough to make it in the borderline elite section. I think him and Chris Godwin are basically equally talented and produced basically the same way last year. So I think it's fair that we put both of them in the star section. I don't think Mike Evans is borderline elite. That could stir up a little bit of controversy, but Mike Evans is probably just a star for me now. For some reason, there's Golden Tate on this list twice, so we'll put him in average again. And we have Kenny Golladay next year. Kenny Golladay, oh, he could be a star, but I think I'm going to put him in great. Again, like I said, a lot of these great wide receivers have tons of potential to get up into the star, maybe even the borderline elite category next year, and Kenny Golladay, I think, is one of those guys that could easily become a star in this league. Now, Terry McLaurin, we're also going to put in great, just like we did with all the young wide receivers that haven't really proven it for more than 1 or 2 years. We're going to put him in the great section. Obviously, Chris Godwin is quite young as well and kind of was unproven, but just because of how well he did last year and how crazy his stats were, that's why we had to put him in the star category. Next up is Cooper Kupp. I feel like a lot of people would put Cooper Kupp in average. I'm putting Cooper Kupp in the great section. I think Cooper Kupp is really underrated, a really shifty wide receiver, and I do really like him as a player. Now, next up, we have Odell Beckham Jr. and we have Tyrell Williams. Those are the last two guys we've got, and I don't think either of them are going to make it to the star category. I think Odell Beckham Jr. is closer to making it to star. I think he could easily, like I said, get up to star. I think there's a lot of players in here that could get up to star. I think Tyrell Williams is also going to be in the great section. So yeah, that is my rankings. I feel really good about elite. I feel pretty good about borderline elite. There's a few players that can maybe move up. Maybe Amari Cooper could move up. Maybe Mike Evans, I guess, could move up. Great. The great section is honestly my favorite section. These are the players that I'm honestly most excited to watch next year. As I go through this list, like, wow, there's a lot of players here that could be absolutely dominant. DeVante Parker, Cortland, just so many players on this list. I don't want to list them all off. You guys can see the list, but great, I think could be easily a lot of these players moving up into star, moving up into borderline elite if they have a good year. And then average, I feel pretty good about the average section. I think everyone in there is probably an average receiver. Some of them have more potential than others. But yeah, that's going to do it for the list. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of you guys that think I was wrong. Just don't come at my mother or my family in the comment section. Leave a like if you do want to see more of these videos. If you guys don't agree with my list, leave that in the comment section, but leave a like on the video if you do enjoy it, because I do usually look at the likes and dislikes to kind of gauge whether I'm going to make more content like this. So yeah, leave a like, and until next time, fellas, I'm out. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.
So,